I'm a psychologist, and today I'm going to share with you some strategies I've come up with patients in order to make their life like super easy. So let's get started. So I once had a patient come in that was super low in motivation. They had no idea why. In our investigation, we found out that it was actually underlying ADHD. They didn't want to take medication, and I supported that. But we needed to come up with strategies for how to basically make it so that we can get them to do boring housework and house chores and all that sort of stuff, which is something that obviously a lot of people struggle with, and because it's like boring to do the same thing over and over again, right? So we tried a couple of things to try and like help out with his motivation. And one strategy he resonated with is the idea of reward pairing. So what this means is you take the boring task and then you pair it with something fun, like, for example, listening to an audiobook or listening to a podcast. But the key idea contained within that is that you only listen to the fun thing. You only use that reward for that particular task, which makes the task more enticing to do, right? Because if you have access to, a podcast or music or whatever, and you don't restrict it, then it doesn't make it as rewarding. Does that make sense? So what you want to do is you want to take the boring task, whatever it is, housework, dishes, cleaning up, and you pair it with something that you find interesting, or at least something that's kind of like palpable, like an audiobook, music, or I don't know, you could probably put a TV show on in the background, but you have to only watch the TV show or only listen to the podcast when you're doing those boring tasks. That worked initially for him, which is interesting. But the problem is that he even started to habituate to that and get used to that, where he would listen to a podcast and do the dishes and then it would get boring, right? So we had to figure out a way to make it so that it wasn't like that and that he could actually manage. So what we did was we created a tier list of tasks of rewards, where you'd start with like a level 1 reward, which is something very small that you can use whilst you're doing the boring task. And then you go up the tiers into the most rewarding thing. So maybe it might start out with a coffee, maybe. And then if that doesn't work, if pairing a coffee with doing the dishes doesn't work, then you'd still do level 1, and then you'd go up to level 2, a level 2 reward, and you'd keep stacking the rewards as you're doing the task in order to keep sort of the task manageable and palpable, because it would be boring to just do the same thing over and over again and have the same rewards over and over again. So you've got to change the reward, make it more intense as you go up. And once again, that worked, but because we're dealing with underlying ADHD here, the dopamine differences, eventually even that started to get boring and not work. So then what we tried is you cycle the rewards. So you try different ones each time. So you still create the ladder, but then you change the rewards within the ladder every so often. So maybe level 1 would be a coffee, level 2 would be an audiobook or whatever, and level 3 might be music. And then maybe you change it, like level 1 is tea, level 2 is a movie, and level 3 is like, I don't know, a YouTube video or something, right? And you change the reward and the levels, and you cycle through them many times over. Now you can, and this works, and thankfully this actually seemed to be able to mitigate most of the dishes problem and the household chores problem and all that sort of stuff. So cycling rewards and reward pairing was really powerful, and that can actually, you can generalize that to other areas of life, like doing the laundry or whatever other boring tasks you find in life. Another one I had was a person came in with autism, and they really needed strategies to build better structure around their existing life, because what they were finding was that they were forgetting to do minor things and basic things. It's interesting, it always seems to be household tasks and household chores that are the problem. Anyway, so we needed to figure out a way into where we could build his desired routine into the existing routine so he wouldn't forget it, because he had a routine and he could initiate behavior. The problem was he was forgetting to bring the boring tasks into the existing routine. So one thing I proposed to him, and it's really interesting to think about, is the idea of hijacking your eyes. So let me explain. I asked him, where do you look the most? Where do your eyes consistently go? They go to your phone screen. They go to the door handle, maybe. They go to the kettle in the kitchen to make a coffee, right? So what you do is you put the boring tasks and the desired tasks that you want to inject into the routine into the location where your eyes typically go, so that you are basically hijacking your own visual acuity, hijacking your own eyeball process, so that you literally cannot miss it because it's on the location that you look at quite frequently. And this worked really well. He would put reminders on his phone screen, he would put reminders literally on the door handle, so that he could not open the door until he'd like write a sticky note out, put it on the door handle, and he literally couldn't forget, because you'd have to touch the sticky note in order to open the door, and that served as like a structural reminder, like a visual reminder. And the other element that is really key for that particular strategy is making it so that when you put the reminder on a location when your eyes look the most, it has to be so that the reminder, you can't bypass it until you actually address the reminder, the issue itself. So for example, if you're forgetting to do something but you use the kettle daily, you might put the reminder, the thing that you need to remember, you put it on top of the kettle or in front of the kettle, so that you literally have to remove the thing in order to get to the desired thing, which was the kettle. And then that way you literally can't forget, because you have to address the issue in order to get to what you're used to doing. Another one that came through that also had autism was struggling with basically task completion. Now, what was interesting about this case, and what was interesting about psychology in general, is sometimes the strategies that I thought everyone knew about, so the basics, people don't know. So when I said to him, have you considered the idea of breaking the task down into steps? So instead of seeing the big task as like a big thing that you have to do, you break it down into steps with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Have you thought about doing that? And the answer was no. Then this strategy is absolutely key for anyone that's never thought about doing it that way. If you have something that's going on in your life that you don't know what to do, well, you break it down. What's step one? What's step two? What's step three? And then you identify the end criteria for each step, as in, how do you know that the step is complete? It's not enough to just say, I need to do this. It's, I need to do this, and I know the task will be complete when what? And then you go on to the next, onto the next, onto the next. Even if it's a 3-step thing or whatever, how many steps, it's kind of like breaking it down into completion points so that you know where to start and where to end. And this has actually turned out to be like super useful. So the last strategy is to do also with motivation and how to basically initiate goals and make life easier. Get goals. How do they make goals? How do you even begin to think about the future? And one way to begin thinking about the future that's useful is imagining how this particular thing you're doing aligns with your values and your personal interests. You see, when you have a sense of control in your life and you have a sense of you're doing the things that you want to do instead of things that have been imposed upon you by the environment, motivation tends to go up. Unfortunately, what can happen at times is you're going to have things imposed upon you anyway that you don't want to do, but will actually end up being useful for you. So the strategy was, and it was actually working with a kid that had issues with homework, and I had to come up with a way of saying to him, well, homework and studying is kind of boring, but there's actually hidden benefits that will serve you on later on. And the kid had an interest in intelligence and IQ, so that was a good leverage point to say to him, well, if you do homework or if you study, you're going to stimulate your brain in its early developmental period, which will mean that you will increase the chances that you're reaching your intellectual potential as you get older. Worded it that way didn't really resonate with him, so I just kind of said something like, if you study, you get smarter. And it kind of worked to resonate with him. And the higher level strategy here is sometimes there's hidden benefits to doing things that you didn't know about. So the first strategy is identifying the value in the task. Whether you can do that or not depends on how much you think about it, but it's kind of like homework is a good example, especially as you're a kid. You study a little bit, you're going to reach your intellectual potential more so than if you just coast along and play video games and don't really do anything learning wise, right? So to increase your motivation, to make life easier, is to hunt for the value in the task you're doing. And if you don't value the task, but you have to do it, then you go a bit further and try and find the specific value or use within that particular task. Because there'll always be a reason. Humans don't just create tasks and mundane tasks for no reason. There's always a reason. Like, for example, doing the dishes, one of the reasons is so that maybe you don't get germs and whatever, you don't get dirty dishes and the house doesn't smell. And if you're going to invite a girl over, you don't want them to see the messy house, right? So there's always a hidden benefit. You just have to extend your mind beyond what you're thinking, beyond the picket fence. And that strategy actually turned out to be super useful for this particular kid. And further on to anyone else that's struggling with task motivation, you look at like, what is the hidden reason, what is the hidden perk or benefit for doing the thing? So yeah, hopefully these 4 strategies I've just monologued to you are helpful to come up with some creative ways to get around motivation. That seems to be a lot of the problem. Another strategy that people can find useful for helping out with motivation is put your phone on grayscale, so that you take all the colors off of your phone screen, so it's just black and white. That's super useful too. It reduces the reward salience a little bit for the phone, and therefore might reduce your usage of it. So that could be another useful thing as well if you're struggling with motivation and you doom scroll a lot. So you put your phone on grayscale mode. But anyway, that's the end of this random quick video. Hopefully people found something useful. Bye bye.